All right. Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to take a look at U.S. visa policy.
Okay.
Specifically, during the Trump administration's America First era, we've got excerpts from pasted text to kind of guide us through this. You might be surprised by how much these changes impacted, various visa categories and the whole application process.
Yeah.
We're talking some visa denials jumped to nearly 30%. And that's just, the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
So to help us unpack all this, we've got an expert on immigration law and policy with us today. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Happy to dive in.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess starting broad, this whole America First idea, is obviously a big part of the Trump administration's agenda.
Yeah.
How did that trickle down, I guess, into visa policy specifically?
Well, America First really became this driving force behind a lot of the changes that we saw in the visa system. Essentially, it signaled this shift towards stricter requirements and increased scrutiny across the board. They wanted to be sure that anyone coming to the U.S., was really meeting a very high bar, really demonstrating that they deserve to be here.
So not just tightening things up a little.
Yeah.
But a whole new level of scrutiny.
Oh, absolutely.
Wow. Okay. So then what did that actually look like for, just everyday people who were applying for these visas?
Well, it meant a lot of things. For one, it meant longer wait times.
Okay.
Applications were taking a lot longer to process.
XM.
And then there were the mountains of paperwork.
Ugh. Paperwork.
Oh, yeah. Way more documentation required than before.
I bet that was fun.
It created this whole atmosphere of uncertainty, not knowing what to expect.
Right.
And it wasn't just work visas either. This affected all different types of visas. Even family-based visas got caught up in these changes.
Really?
Oh, yeah. For example, the K-1 fiancé.
Oh, wow.
That's the visa for, someone who wants to come to the U.S. to marry
right.
a U.S. citizen.
Okay.
That's typically seen as a pretty straightforward visa.
Yeah, it's about love. It's about family. It's not high-stakes global economics.
Right, exactly.
But even that visa saw a pretty significant increase in denials.
Yeah.
Wow. So that really kind of shows how
it does.
These changes, they impacted people on this really personal level.
Absolutely. It really suggests that even those visas that, we've traditionally thought of as not particularly controversial, they were subject to this new ways of scrutiny.
So if even the K-1 visa is getting held up like this, then what?
And speaking of scrutiny, we've got to talk about the public charge rule.
Oh, yeah. I remember hearing about this.
Yeah.
This sounded pretty intimidating, to be honest.
It was. Basically, think of it as a kind of financial stress test for your future in the U.S. Applicants had to demonstrate that they wouldn't be a financial burden on the government.
So what kind of proof?
They had to prove that they were unlikely to need to rely on things like public assistance.
Right.
This meant digging up financial records, health insurance details.
So it wasn't just filling out a form and saying, I'm good for it.
Sometimes even affidavits of support from family or friends.
It's they wanted you to predict your entire financial future. To be nope, I'm never going to need anything.
Exactly. It was a lot to ask.
And then on top of all that stress, we've heard all these stories about the processing delays.
Yeah.
I mean, people were waiting months, even years for the decision.
Those delays weren't just an inconvenience either.
Right.
They had real-world consequences.
Oh, absolutely.
Businesses lost out on talent.
Yeah.
Families were kept apart.
Yeah.
People's lives were put on hold. It was a really frustrating and often heartbreaking situation.
Okay, so we've got the public charge rule.
Yeah.
The increased scrutiny, the delays, the paperwork.
Yeah.
But what about specific visa categories? Were some hit harder than others by these changes?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The H-1B visa, for example, that's the one for skilled workers that companies use to bring in, talent from overseas.
Right.
That one took a major hit.
How major are we talking?
At one point, denial rates for H-1B visas jumped from 6% to 24%.
24%. That's a huge jump.
Yeah, it was a massive.
That must just sent shockwaves through certain industries.
But absolutely, particularly tech and engineering.
Right. Yeah.
Those industries that rely heavily on global talent.
Yeah.
Imagine, you're a company. You're trying to recruit the best and the brightest, and suddenly you're facing a much higher chance of those visas being denied.
Yeah, that makes sense.
created a lot of uncertainty, potentially contributed to a brain drain,
Yeah.
as skilled professionals started looking elsewhere.
Like to other countries where maybe it's easier.
Yeah, to countries with more welcoming immigration policies.
And then that makes you kind of wonder about the long-term impact on, U.S. innovation.
Absolutely.
If companies can't bring in the top minds from around the world,
Yeah.
it's got to have some kind of ripple effect.
It does. It really raises concerns about the U.S. losing its edge in terms of, attracting global talent.
And it wasn't just the H-1B, right?
Right.
There were other categories that felt this as well.
Oh, yeah. There were attempts to restrict L1 visas, for example.
Okay. Remind me, what's the L1?
Those allow companies to transfer their employees between their international offices.
Oh, okay.
So let's say you're working for a company and they want to transfer you to their U.S. brand.
Right.
That became a lot harder to do.
So even if you already work for the company, it's not just...
It wasn't a guarantee anymore.
Yeah.
And while some of those restrictions were challenged in court,
Okay.
it just shows how widespread the impact of these policy changes really was.
It wasn't just limited to one
No, it was.
tiny little corner of the visa world.
It was a broad, sweeping change.
And then we got to talk about international students.
Yeah.
I mean, they contribute so much to U.S. universities, to the economy.
They do.
How did these changes impact them?
Well, there were changes to something called optional practical training, or OPT,
Okay.
and that made it more difficult for international students to get work experience in the U.S. after they graduate.
So OPT is like...
OPT is basically a program that lets them apply what they've learned,
Yeah.
in a real-world setting.
Okay.
It's often a stepping stone to a more permanent job.
So it's not just about studying here.
Right.
It's about having the chance to actually build a career here.
Absolutely. And these changes, they really sent a ripple effect through universities. Prospective students, started looking at other countries where post-graduation work opportunities
Makes sense.
were more accessible.
Yeah, it's like, why would I go through all this trouble to get a degree if I can't even use it here?
Exactly. And so this raised concerns about the U.S. losing out on a whole pool of talent that could contribute to innovation and economic growth.
Okay, so after diving into all of this, I mean, what's the bottom line for someone out there who's listening and they're like, okay, this is a lot.
Yeah.
How do I even navigate this crazy, complex visa landscape?
Well, I'd say first off, stay informed.
Okay.
Immigration laws and policies are always changing.
Right.
So you've got to stay up to date, subscribe to reputable news sources, talk to immigration attorneys.
Sounds like a good argument for having an immigration lawyer on speed dial.
Yeah, absolutely. Immigration law is incredibly complex, and a qualified attorney can help you avoid those costly mistakes.
And I imagine planning ahead is like more crucial now than ever.
Oh, absolutely. You can't just throw an application together at the last minute anymore.
Right.
Start the process early, gather your documents meticulously, and be prepared for those potential delays. If you're an employer, think about backup plans.
Okay.
Explore alternative staffing strategies.
Okay.
Be ready to adapt if your first choice candidate runs into visa hurdles.
So we've covered a lot here.
Yeah.
Stricter requirements.
Yeah.
Longer wait times. More uncertainty.
A lot more.
Across the board.
Yeah.
It's a lot of process.
It is.
But hopefully this deep dive gave you a little bit better understanding of kind of what went down and what it could mean for the future.
It really makes you think, considering all the economic and social implications of these changes, how will they continue to shape immigration patterns? How will they affect U.S. competitiveness on the global stage?
Those are some big questions.
Big questions indeed.
Well, we'll have to leave it there for today.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us and sharing your expertise.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
And everyone listening, thanks for tuning in to another deep dive. We'll see you next time.
See you then.